Hello everybody, and I'd like to draw your attention to this discussion about rent control. We'll first start with a market that we have a downward sloping demand curve representing the people that would like to rent in this particular city. Those are the number of apartments, 250, 500 up to over 1,000 apartments are demanded. If the price was low enough, like here it's $620, the rent is $620. If we lower it straight down to 600, you can see that the quantity demanded is 938. The quantity supplied is only 208. We have what's called a shortage. More people want to rent at $600 than suppliers or landlords are willing to provide apartments at $600 a month. So this shortage leads to upward pressure on the on prices. See, $600 is too low for this particular city that we're representing. So if we were to find that the price were to push up closer, the shortage would get smaller and smaller. The quantity demanded would decrease and the quantity supplied would increase, and we'd get closer and closer to what we would call an equilibrium point. For instance, I'll just stop there for a moment. At a rent of $900, the quantity demanded is 703, and the quantity supplied is 521 apartments. So we almost have something much better, but it's still a shortage. If we were to overshoot and the price were to go up too high, let's say to $1,400, now we have the reverse situation. The quantity demanded is only 300, where there's over 1,000 apartments being supplied, because these landlords believe that they're going to be able to get $1,400 in rent, so they are in fact going to try very hard to they'll pull out all the stops and make more apartments and so forth. But the market can't support such a high price. Not even though some people are willing to pay that high price and do, only 313 do, and that leaves a lot of empty apartments. We have a surplus in that case. So right here, where the two meet, where the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are equal to each other, we have what's called the equilibrium or market clearing price. $1,000 a month will give us 625 demanded and 625 supplied. There is no shortage. There is no surplus. Answer, $1,000. Now, if we wanted to take a look at another opportunity here to do this, use the calculator to answer the question below about the market for apartments. Here we have maybe the same sort of situation. We can move this up. We find that we have a perfect market for apartments when there is $1,000 a month and 625 is the equilibrium quantity. What's the equilibrium quantity of rental apartments in this situation then? 625 apartments is what's in the equilibrium. Remember, equilibrium is both price and quantity. So we have related questions, but one of them asking about the price, one asking about quantity. If we drop down to here and we evaluate something, when the market for rental housing is in equilibrium, are all suppliers and demanders happy? Given the calculator above, which of the following statements are true? So if we were to take a look at this, for instance, when we are out of equilibrium, let's say we had a shortage, then certainly we've got unhappy demanders, because there's let's say if we drop it down to, say, this point right here, where we've got rent for $520. Sounds wonderful. 1,000 people want apartments, but only 125 get them. So you have 875 unhappy demanders. The suppliers are comfortable, if you will, because the suppliers above $520 are not actual suppliers. They aren't willing to rent their apartments for $520, so they don't. But they find some other better use for their resources, but than renting it out as apartments. But if you have very unhappy demanders, the reverse is true when the price is too high. Here we have let's say $1,600. there's only 156 renters willing to pay that price, even though you have 1,250 suppliers. So you've got many unhappy landlords that have apartments available that are empty because no one is renting them at such a high price. So when you have equilibrium, you have a situation where everyone is happy. There's all these people that are potential suppliers that are willing to rent their apartment for $1,000 or less, and they're all renting them for $1,000, and that allows them to be happy. And all of the supply curves that are above the $1,000 are potential suppliers who would need to get more than $1,000 in order to be happy, and since they can only rent their apartments for $1,000, they decide not to. They decide to put their resources elsewhere, and that means that we can assume they're happy. No empty apartments because there's no surplus and no shortage. We don't have people standing in line either because all of the demanders who are willing to pay a high price, like that demander right there is willing to pay $1,600, and that demander there is willing to pay $1,400, and so forth. All of these people that are demanding an apartment at high prices are able to get an apartment for $1,000 because there's 625 renters able to find apartments for $1,000, and there's 625 landlords who are able to find tenants for $1,000. These demanders down here are only willing to get an apartment if the price of the apartment was less than $1,000. They think that paying $1,000, these people think that paying $1,000 for an apartment is too much, and they're not interested in it. So they'll continue with whatever living arrangement they have, which we assume is happy. So at equilibrium, all suppliers and demanders are happy. Some demanders believe that the price is too high because they're not willing to pay the equilibrium price, which means that they're comfortable with using their $1,000 for something other than renting. Some suppliers think the price is too low because they're not willing to rent apartments at the equilibrium price. Well, that's also true. So 1 and 2 are both true statements. Now, if we move on down to here, consider the market for rentals in a different town. Assume that the city council in this town decided that the market price is unfair to low-income renters and passes a law that establishes a price ceiling of $800 a month. It sounds like it's very pro-renter, doesn't it? Making a law that says that landlords can't charge more than $800 a month. Well, let's see what the effect would be. See, in this city, the equilibrium price is $1,250, and that leads to everyone being happy, where there's actually 1,250 apartments being rented and 1,250 apartments being offered. So we're all in equilibrium. But if the price was forced down, down until we got to $800 rent, which is down here, we see that we have a shortage. We have fewer apartments available. Some landlords will convert their apartments into single-family dwellings, and instead of renting them out in the rental market, they would just sell them to people as condos, for instance. Some people will convert their apartments into office space or storage space, anything that's free from the rent control. Some people will say, well, I was willing to rent my upstairs apartment when I could get $1,200 a month for it, but if I have to rent it out for only $800 a month, it's not worth it to me to have the hassle and the risk of having someone live up in my top part, so I'm just going to take it off the market. There's lots of different reasons for the quantity supplied dropping down, but what we can say is that at $800 there were some suppliers on the margin who were willing to offer their apartments for rent at $1,250 and are not willing to offer their rent at $800, and that's that marginal difference right there. Of course, there's a bunch of new demanders that show up as well, because not only did we have the 1,250 people that were willing to pay a high price, but we also have added an additional 600 or almost people that are looking for apartments as well. So now the quantity demanded is 1,813, but the quantity supply is only 500. We have a serious shortage of over 1,300 apartments that are desired at 800 but not supplied. And so that's a problem. Let me see. What's the quantity demanded at the price ceiling of 800? We can see right there that the quantity demanded is 1813. Using that. All right. And then if we go on down here, looks like this thing, after the city council enforce the price ceiling of 800, the quantity of apartments supplied, and we can just drop that down again. It's the same little idea that we had before. The quantity supplied is only 500. And using the calculated answers below, after the city council sets and enforces the price ceiling, the number of apartments actually rented will only be, and this is a great question, so if, for instance, when the price was in equilibrium and we had $1,250 a month, we also had 1,250 demanded and 1,250 supplied, and so the number of apartments being rented was 1,250. But when the price is forced down by well-meaning city council members to only $800 a month, then the quantity demanded is very large, but the quantity supplied is only 500. The quantity that actually gets rented then is the amount that's available, not any more than that. So instead of having over 1,000 apartments being rented in this city, because of the rent control in this city, we have it drop down to 500. Less than half the apartments are available now. If we take a look at this, right, after the city council sets and enforces the price ceiling, there will be a shortage of some number of apartments. I think we can calculate that. Again, it's the same sort of exercise. 1,813 demanded, 500 supplied, leaves a shortage of 1,313. So we'll put that in there. That's very good. And you can see that that having those apartments actually causes a lot of problems. Now, the shortage that results after the city council sets and enforces the price ceiling is caused by the price ceiling set by the city council itself. A lot of people get confused about that. They think it might be the greed of the suppliers or the greed of the demanders or something having to do with the market. But it's not a market failure when the city council interfered with the market. It's failure of government. If we take a look at the scenario further, I'd like you to consider an even deeper analysis of rent control. Rent control causes two types of welfare losses. Now, the first is similar to the deadweight loss from a tax. When the price is forced below the equilibrium level, the quantity supplied is reduced. But the second type arises because the wrong people end up with the apartments that's supplied. Maybe we're all familiar with some of these stories out of Manhattan where people that are while we have 20 people living in one apartment, we have one person living in a 5-bedroom apartment on the upper West Side because they have very affordable housing and it's a kind of a maluse of resources. It would be fine if somebody wants to spend $2,000 a month for a non-rent controlled apartment to have those 5 bedrooms to themselves. That's one thing. But if they get a special deal because of poor government policy, they only have to pay $350 for that 5-bedroom apartment and are using more resources than they are actually paying for, then that's a problem. That's inefficient. As the article observes, this second problem can also cause the equilibrium price for apartments that are not rent controlled to be higher than they would be. So we have a number of different negative aspects of rent control. Consider a simple market with just 5 potential renters and 4 apartments. We got Ann, Bill, Charlie, David, and Ellen. The table shows the maximum amount that each renter would be willing to pay for an apartment. You see that Ellen is willing to pay only $400 an apartment, whereas Ann is willing to pay $800. I want to pause here for a second too. Just because Ann is willing to pay $800 does not mean that Ann is richer than anyone else. She might be, but it also might be that she desires the apartment more because her time is so precious. Perhaps, for instance, that she wants the apartment in the town because of the high opportunity costs related to her job. Maybe that she's got minimize recruiting or commuting time or things like that. The following graph shows the supply and demand curves in this market. Supply curve is represented as a vertical line. So the reason why we make the supply curve in this place vertical is because we show that there are 4 apartments available in this town regardless of whether the rent is high or low. To keep the problem simple, we'll assume that it's impossible to build new apartments in the short run, so the supply remains fixed at 4. Now, on the demand curve, each point is labeled with the name of the corresponding renter: Ann, Bill, Charlie, David, Ellen. So it makes sense that since Ann, Bill, Charlie, and David are the top 4 willing to pay, they are the 4 renters that are willing to pay the most, that rents will go, in fact, for $500, and that the 4 people who are, if there's only 4 apartments and there's 5 people, who is going to get those apartments is the question. And if we use the market to decide, then the 4 who are willing to pay the most are the 4 that will get the apartment. And that's what this graph shows. What's the equilibrium rental price for apartments in this market? That's right, it's $500. You see right there, between 4 and 600 is the equilibrium price. Equilibrium quantity is 4. Now suppose that 2 of the apartments are subject to rent control. They rent for $300 a month, which is less than anyone is willing to pay. That means everyone would love to get that $300 apartment. Now, suppose that David and Ellen live in these 2 apartments. Go up and take a look at David and Ellen. Go, oh, that's nice. David and Ellen, they're the ones that are willing to pay so little. They must be poor. Not so. Just because they're willing to pay little, maybe it's because, for instance, Ellen is a dentist, and she's got a house already up in Rockland, and she's got another house out on Montauk, and she has her house that's in Newark. But she would like to have an apartment in Manhattan, occasionally to use it, and that's why she's only willing to pay $400 for it. We don't know anything about Ellen. Just because she's willing to pay a low amount, we can't assume that she's poor. But anyway, she gets the low apartment. She's the one only has to pay $300 for one of these apartments, and David also is the other person that gets it. Now, if that happens, let's see what the effect is on the other 2, or the other 3 people. The market for apartments not subject to rent control now has only 3 potential renters, Ann, Bill, and Charlie, and a supply of only 2 apartments. In the graph below, plot the new supply and demand curves. So what we're going to do is take the new supply curve, and it's no longer is this supply curve going to show 4 apartments, right? This would not be realistic, because there's only 2 apartments now that are available in the market. And because there's only 2 apartments, and the people that are available, let me see, I believe there was the 3 are 800, 700, and 600. So if we say there's one person willing to pay 800, there's another person willing to pay 700, and there's a third person willing to pay 600. Oop, there we go. Now, if we take a look, that's the new demand curve, given that there's only 3 renters, and the new supply curve, given that there's only 2 apartments. And by putting Ann, Bill, and Charlie on here, we can now see that the price of rents for the rent control, even though they're only $300, has caused the non-rent control to move up from $500 to $700. Let me see. If David and Ellen live in rent-controlled apartments, what's the equilibrium price for the non-rent controlled apartments? $700. Again, assume David and Ellen live in rent-controlled apartments. By how much will rent on non-rent controlled apartments decrease if price controls are removed? So, let's just read the question carefully. What we would expect is, if they removed the rent control, we would find that the price of these rent-controlled apartments would jump up to $500, and the non-rent control apartments would drop down to $500. So, again, assuming David and Ellen live in rent-controlled, by how much will rent on non-rent controlled apartments decrease? It'll decrease by $200, if the rent control is removed. Drop from 700 down to 500. In the market in which Dave and Ellen have rent control apartments, Ellen gets an apartment and Charlie does not. In the market with no price controls, the situation is reversed. Charlie gets an apartment and Ellen does not. How would you compare the efficiencies of these two outcomes? So let's appreciate what we said. Remember, up here, when we let the market decide, Ellen, the one who valued the apartment the least, who was willing to only pay $400 for an apartment, she's the one that didn't get the apartment. The four people that wanted the apartment the most, exhibited by their willingness to pay for it, were the ones that got it. So under a market situation, Ellen doesn't get an apartment because there's only 4 apartments and 5 people. But under this situation, the person who doesn't get an apartment is Charlie, because the 2 people willing to pay the most get the $700 apartments, and the 2 people, David and Ellen, lucked out, I guess, and got the cheap apartments for $300. So if we evaluate that now, we can see that Charlie, who was willing to pay $500, no, how much was Charlie willing to pay for that? Charlie was willing to pay $600 for an apartment, instead is not able to rent a $700 apartment, and Ellen, who was not willing to pay for a $500 apartment, gets one for $300. So if we think about the various answers, the equilibrium with rent controls is inefficient because the apartment would be worth more to Charlie, but Ellen gets it. See, Charlie gets no apartment that he thinks is worth $600, and Ellen gets an apartment, but she would value it only at $400. So that would probably be true. The equilibrium with rent controls is inefficient because it reduces the supply of apartments. It didn't actually reduce the supply of apartments in this demonstration. It changed the number of apartments stayed at 4 in both examples. It's just that it reduced the number of non-rent control apartments that were available. And the equilibrium with rent controls and the equilibrium without rent controls are equally efficient. No, I disagree. In one, renters are better off, and the other, landlords are better off. If the council removes rent controls, the gains for landlords exactly offset the losses for renters. So, how would you compare the efficiencies of these two outcomes? And you get to pick them. I like answer A. I don't like answer C. And let's analyze why it isn't true, right? In this particular case, the landlords who are willing to, let's say, rent, they're able to generate, if it was the same landlord, they could generate 4 times 5 or $2,000 a month this way. And down here, they're getting $2,000 a month. However, right, so that is to say that the landlords still get $2,000 a month both ways. They get $700 from Ann, $700 from Bill, $300 from David, and $300 from Ellen under rent control. Under non-rent control, Ann, Bill, Charlie, and David all give the landlord $500. However, the benefit or consumer surplus that you would represent from them could be compared as well. All right. Thank you.